Welcome back to America Decides. As we mentioned before our last break, President Biden went to Florida and Georgia today to survey the widespread damage from Hurricane Helene. The storm, so far, has killed more than 200. Many more remain unaccounted for and has inflicted immense devastation across the Southeast after making landfall last week. Our next guest, well, it's fair to say he's an eyewitness and a survivor of the impact of Helene. Chris Moody is a lecturer in journalism at Appalachian State University in North Carolina. Chris, it's good to see you. First of all, tell our audience how you are, what you witnessed, and what the condition of your community currently is.
Well, thankfully, I personally am safe, but many, many others are not. Their homes are destroyed. Their properties are going to take years to get back together. And the community, in terms specifically of the infrastructure, is going to be a long road ahead. This area is high up in the mountains. It's a place that obviously is not used to having big hurricanes or storms coming through it in that way. And it knocked out key parts of the infrastructure in the region, particularly roads and bridges, where many times in this mountain community, there's water that comes underneath those roads and bridges, of course, and they just completely took many of them out. There were hundreds of roads that were closed in the aftermath of this storm, making it incredibly difficult, obviously, to get life back on track, but also to get emergency vehicles to rural areas and offer aid and help in ways that it might be easier in less remote regions. And so there's a real sticky problem ahead, but the good people of Western North Carolina are working together. Both public and private investment is being made in making sure people are safe and making sure that we can get our communities back together.
Chris, you have an article in The Atlantic that describes how the community hasn't really had the luxury of expecting people to come there to assist them. They've had to take up all manner of tasks. What's the hierarchy of needs at the moment?
Well, the first thing that people checked on each other was to make sure they were alive and safe. Then was fresh water and food. Many people lost electricity, and many of these people in this area, their homes are on wells, and you can't get water running in your home without electricity. So there are still people that are filling up jugs and buckets of water and sharing those. And then after clean water, it's just making sure that people can get their electricity and then also get access to grocery stores. If you can't drive to a grocery store because there's a giant cavern in there, a chasm in the middle of the road, it's a real problem. So it's a matter of identifying who needs the access to that food and how we can get it to them as soon as possible. I'm currently in Tennessee gathering supplies and will be driving back home later this week to deliver everything that we possibly can.
You paint in the article a picture of a remote place. Is it so remote that it is, as we speak now, still untouched by either state or federal intervention?
Well, there are probably some places that haven't had the kind of intervention you might think of, maybe like an emergency vehicle being able to get to them. But I assure you that communities have been able to identify people in need and have gotten to them, whether it might not be by a vehicle or a boat, but it was probably by foot. In our neighborhood, in the immediate aftermath of this storm, there were giant holes in the road that you could not get a vehicle over. And then on the other side of the road, it's blocked by trees. And so some communities, including my own home, was blocked in on both sides. Well, people scrambled down into those holes and scrambled back up and were delivering food back and forth and visiting their families. In the immediate aftermath of that storm, you could hear the sound of chainsaws and tractors and four-wheelers, people coming to the aid of one another. It is so remote that you couldn't expect an emergency vehicle to come to your rescue, but you could expect your neighbors to knock on your door and check on you, and that is exactly what people did.
And Chris, I'm not sure this would necessarily be a conversation in this immediate period afterwards, but you mentioned at the top that it's not a region that accustoms itself to being hit this hard by a hurricane that has landfall near Tampa. Has that changed the arc of conversation about weather, how to prepare, how to try to adapt in a place that you're in is it Boone, North Carolina? Is that correct?
I'm in Boone, North Carolina, and then Asheville, just south of us, was hit very hard as well. This is a region that people have talked about as being kind of immune to the extreme effects of climate change. And I think we're going to be rethinking that, as this is just some kind of safe haven that yes, we do have to be prepared. I think there will be major conversations about how we reinforce and build our roads to sustain the future problems like this. And so as we rebuild, that will certainly be part of the equation.
Giving us an eyewitness account. Chris Moody, thank you so very much. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, Major.